My name is Serena. I'm going to tell you about my crazy stalker ex boyfriend Justin, what I met at college. I'm originally from a small town, Indiana, and I was given an opportunity to go to a college in Ohio. I was very looking forward to this great college. And not only that, my best friend Sabrina and I was going to be at the same college. And I was very surprised when she mentioned it that she was also going to the same college as I was going to. Since Sabrina and I was actually our childhood friends, so at least I have one person at this new college that I won't be alone. Sure, I might be miss my parents when I'm moving back, but they told me having this opportunity to go to college is something great because it could be also good be giving me a great opportunity and also a potential find a good career after college. And I do agree with my parents on that one. But when I went to college, me and Sabrina became roommates. And that was something I really had hope. And I was really surprised though. But during my orientation at college, along with Sabrina, we actually ran into a group of guys that turns out to be a good guys. And one of them actually by the name Max, who later is going to end up to be as Sabrina's boyfriend. And he's a very cool guy, very protective, but he's a very cool person to hang out with. But one of the guys that we also encountered was also a guy by the name Justin. Justin was also he was originally from this small town was the college is located in, so he was a local. So after the orientation was over, we was given a free time the rest of the day to just get to know each other, new students, and just to explore the new college campus. So Max and Justin had asked me and Sabrina if we want to hang out with them after this orientation and just maybe go downtown and just grab something to eat and get to know each other. And both me and Sabrina actually said yes. And we went to this small restaurant in town and we just actually had a good time. We got to know Max and even Justin even better. Even afterwards, when me and Sabrina went to our room, she actually mentioned that Justin seems to be a little bit shy guy, but it's something I could relay on to because when I first went to like high school, I was very shy because there was a whole new environment. But she did mention something that Max told her that Justin may like me. I was like, wait, are you serious? And she just nodded and said, yeah, he kind of likes, seems to likes you. But even though I only just got to know him, I wasn't really much is like the type of person just running to a relationship right at the moment I see a person. But what I didn't know, me and Justin were going to have a few classes together, like biology, English, and math. And I wouldn't mind that because over the next few weeks after we started high college, we started hanging out a bit more, and we even went to the school library to do some homework together, and even just to hang out. And after a while, though, after about a few weeks, he actually had asked me out on a date. I was very hesitant, and I said I need some time to think about it. And when I mentioned brought this up to Sabrina in our room, she actually said you should actually do say yes. Since Sabrina also like him, but as a friend. Since she thought more about Max, maybe, and after about thinking about it, I actually texted Justin since he actually gave me his phone number just shortly after we started college, just to see if we want to be friends, and I didn't mind that. So I texted him, yes, I would like to go out with you, and I asked him what he had in mind to go out for. Since we both were had a very limited budget of what we were going to do things, but he just suggested maybe a movies, and that's something I can understand. So We decided to go there on a Friday after school, after college, the last class. So I told him that I will first go to my room, get ready before go to the movies because I wanted to look a little more nice, or at least more decent, well enough for our first date. But that is something my parents had told me about. The first date always be looking good and always be polite. So he picked me up around outside the college campus, and we went to the movies, and we decided to pick this comedy movie, and it actually went perfectly well. He actually still told me that he has seen this kind of movie before, but something similar, and he actually had a good taste in movies, and I loved that. Even after the movies, he actually went back with me back to college, and outside our room, at least my room, he asked me what I thought about the movie and what I thought about the date, and I said, told him that I actually had a good night. And I told him that I was very hesitating to even answer yes at first. I was because I told him this was actually my very first date ever, and I was just a bit nervous, but I didn't regret that I actually went on a date with him since he was very polite, very gentleman, and that made him smile. And then he asked if it was okay if he could kiss me. By asking me it was something I very much appreciate. So I said yes, and he kissed me on the cheek and said, maybe we can go on some other time. And I said, yeah, I would actually mind. I would like that. So after he left, I went back inside, and Sabrina was still up. She was in bed reading a book that she had, and she asked me how my day went, and I said it actually went really well, and she was even asking me if I was considered to go out with them again. I said yes, and after about a few weeks about after our first date, we actually had been on a few more dates, and after I think it was our eighth date, we made it official. And I was very happy to have a boyfriend who was very polite, very kind, generous. But there were a few occasions after when we became official that he seemed to be a little bit a different personality. It wasn't so much any major changes. It's just that he often texted me just asking where I were or if I was busy with something, and it wasn't like anything very serious wrong with those questions. I was usually in class when I told him that I was in class I couldn't text, and he respected that. And I promised to text him after class was over, which I did. And it's nothing. When I told Sabrina about this, she just told me she wasn't alarmed, and she was just said that he was only curious what I was up to. And but during one class, he literally texted me and asked if I could talk to him, but I said I was in class. But he said, I don't care, I want to talk to you. That was probably the first red flag that I ignored. I told him as soon as the class is over, I would call him. And he agreed. And as soon as the class was over, though, I was actually in the hallway and I did call him. And he sounded like almost perfectly normal, no screaming or anything like that. But he said that he probably wanted to see me outside outside school, and I was like, I can't. I have a class only in a few minutes. Can we wait? I mean, I guess he after that one since this is my last class for the day. Can we do that? At first, he was not really happy about this answer. But I promised him that class was not going to be long, probably just 1 hour. So he agreed. So I went straight to the next class, but even though that should be a red flag, but I really didn't put it in mind. But things would eventually start to change a lot more different. Because shortly only like a few weeks after that, I was just hanging out with Sabrina, and then this two guys walked up to us. It was actually classmates of us we had, and after that Sabrina left and one of the other guys as well. But one of the guys, he remained, and he was just talking to me, and he said something that made me laugh, and suddenly Justin showed up, and I was about to say hi to him, but he looked so furious, and he like walked up to us, but walked past me, and told the guy, "Don't talk to her. She's my girlfriend. Don't hit on her." And then he said, "If you don't leave, I will mess you up." And this guy was just stunned by what he just said, and just walked away. And then he turned around towards me and said, "How dare you be cheating on me?" I told him I wasn't cheating. This guy just walked up to me, and he's a classmate of mine, and we're just talking. And he said, "You're not allowed to talk to any other guys and then me." That furious me, because there were a lot of guys in this particular school, and I have a lot of male friends, or at least male classmates in my classes. And if I end up partner with someone for the class, should I tell the teacher I can't be a partner with a guy because my boyfriend doesn't allow me to do so? I tell him that. And that made him even more furious. "Well, you make sure that that doesn't happen then." And then he just walked off, still angry. I was stunned. This was the very first time that Justin has ever reacted this way. I was like, what is going on here? And when I went to my dorm, to my room, Sabrina was there with Max already. They were just talking about some schoolwork or something. I don't even remember the details. But they saw I didn't look happy. I was confused look or something like that. And Max was like, "Hey, Serena, are you okay? Did something happen?" At first, I wasn't hesitating to try to tell them, but eventually I agreed. And I told them what just had happened. Both Sabrina and Max just looked at each other really stunned, because this was a very out of character of Justin. Because Justin was a friend of Max, and they had no idea. And I asked Max if Justin has ever been like this before with any other previous girlfriends or anything. But Max said no. I mean, I only know them for like 2 years, but I only know them for like since high school. But no, he never actually been like this before. This is what is surprising me, he said. And even Sabrina was a little bit scared. It's like, if he is like this, it was only a matter of time before he could freak out like this again. But I told her maybe this was just one time an event, and boy was I wrong about that one. Because only a few days later, when I was in chemistry class, I was actually being partnered with a guy, and I was even have forgot about what Justina told me only a few days earlier. But when I walked out from the class with this guy, we were just talking, and who else was standing in the hallway? And then Justin. When he saw me walking out with this guy talking, he was just standing there with a serious, angry look and crossed his arms. And even though when this guy saw Justin, he didn't say anything. Just by look at him, this guy just felt uncomfortable and just walked away and didn't say a word to me or him. But after this guy has left, I was walked up to Justin, and before he could say anything, or even I could say anything, he smacked me right in the face with his hand, and it's like, "I told you not to be cheating or talk to other guys." But before I can even say anything, he slapped me again and again and said, "You're a horrible girlfriend, you know that? I can't understand what you're just being around other guys. You're cheating on me." And he started running away crying. I was dumbfounded, because shortly after he left, Sabrina walked up to this hallway with her boyfriend Max, and they saw me there standing dumbfounded again. And now Both Max and Sabrina were getting a bit more curious, but also a bit worried about my safety. After all, this is the very first time Justin has ever reacted this way. And I told him not to worry, maybe it's just an outburst, and I will make sure that he doesn't even do this again. But Sabrina told me if this happened again, I should tell someone, a teacher, or maybe a campus security guard or something. But I assured her that's not what would not to be necessary because I will try to tell him not to be doing it again, or I will not want to be with anyone because I don't tolerate any violence in my life. And I should have been listening to Sabrina's warning because, and I just say this is only one of the first few things that Justin did. But surprising enough, only a couple of days after this event, Justin was back to normal. And even when he saw me talking to just one guy, he looked a bit maybe mad, but I told him this guy was only asking me a question where to find the particular teacher. And this guy was actually standing right almost next to me and Justin when he asked me, so that was nothing as anything serious. But I know that Justin was mad because anytime when a guy was even looking at me or even talking to me, but it was only one guy that he was tolerant about doing this was actually Max. Even when I was standing with Max alone and I saw Justin, I was expecting that Justin was just gonna run up to him and tell him back off, that is my girlfriend, or start beating him. But he didn't. He just walked up to us as normal, and he was like, "Oh, hey Max, hey Serena, are you busy tonight?" And I was like, "No." And well, actually, I have homeworks with Sabrina in my dorm room. Oh, maybe I can come here and join you. No, we decided to have a girls' study night. Oh, okay. And I was like curious to Max. Did you notice that he didn't freak out because I was talking to a different guy? And Max agreed, knowing how he did freak out a few times before with other guys, but not really stuff about Max. It was something like Max said, well, maybe he knows I'm not a type since I'm already dating your best friend, Sabrina. But it should be a red flag. But it wasn't. And even though this probably wouldn't be much a problem, but then that same night, when evening, when me and Sabrina were just starting having our stunning night, we had ordered pizza, and this pizza delivery guy showed up, and Justin, he was actually in the hallway. When he saw me talking to this guy, I was like, he was just standing there, and afterwards, after I closed the door, I heard this scuffle outside yelling, and before I even know it, I heard this big slam on the floor and a lot of punching, and then suddenly screaming, and then a lot of running. I wasn't really was. I only opened my door to see what happened, and I was stunned to see the pizza delivery guy just run away, screaming for help. And I saw Justin standing there with this a furious look, and he said, I told you not to talk to any other guys. And then he just back off and just left the hallway. I was standing there, dumbfounded. And Sabrina had also heard every single thing, and she was worried. And even afterwards, on the next day, I was called into the principal's office, and even Sabrina was there with me as a witness. And this pizza delivery guy had told his boss, and the boss called the campus, especially the principal, about this incident, and they demanded to know exactly what just happened. And the principal wasn't mad at me because he was just want to know what happened from my point of view, and I just told him that me and my best friend Sabrina were just studying, and we ordered pizza, and this guy showed up to deliver it. And after I paid him and I closed the door, and I did mention that he saw Justin in the hallway, and just after I was about to start walking back to my friend, I heard this scuffle outside my door, and a lot yelling, punching, and then suddenly this slam to the floor. And even though I didn't witness any of those stuff that happened, I only heard. But when I opened the door, I just want to see what's happening. I saw that the pizza delivery guy just run away screaming for help. And Justin standing there angrily looked at me and just walked off, and that's what I told the principal. The principal said that maybe I should try to talk to Justin because this is it's not allowed. And even the principal had a talk with Justin, and Justin didn't even deny anything of this. He only said he was only there to be cautious because he was only protecting me from any potential dangerous guys. But that meant any guys, even if it was a classmate or or in this case, a pizza delivery guy. And now I was feeling furious about this. And Sabrina agreed. I shouldn't be with a guy who is pretending like be this. And I was really hesitating to even to tell Justin about this, but I agreed. So I called him over phone and said, Justin, we need to talk. And he was like, oh, hey, Serena. Yeah, I can talk. What is it? And I told him what he did against that pizza delivery guy and other previous guys, what they were just talking to me was not unacceptable. And also his behavior by accusing me for cheating on him because without any actual proof and attacking a defenseless guy because he was doing his job, that was out of the line. And before even Justice had any other word, I told him, Justin, it is over between us, and I don't want to see you again, and don't even try to talk to me. And goodbye. And I hang up. And just only shortly afterwards, he tried to call me, non-stop, but I didn't answer. And he sent me voicemail saying that he was sorry, he didn't meant it, he was just overprotective, he didn't mean it, and he would ask me for a second chance, and he would never do it again. Even though I was hesitating to give him a second chance, because I've been told people should be given a second chance. But Sabrina told me not to do it because not just only because he was crying, but how he behaved towards other guys. And now this, she said, you should trust him. If he had this behavior, this outburst, this no matter way to say that he will react again shortly after you go back with him. But it was not unlike I could just avoid him because we had a few classes together. But I told Sabrina that I would never go back. And even though he still texted me nonstop, asking for forgiveness, but I still ignored those texts until he just answered one of them. I was like, Justin, leave me alone. I'm not going back to you. And that probably was a bad mistake to even to say to him. But he said, you will regret what you just did. You will be mine, no matter what you do or say. And then he just hang up the phone, and I was, even though I was scared and angry at the same time, I told Sabrina what happened. And now she was also worried about this, and she had told Max to about this, and he was equally mad because this was even on the line of Justin. Because Justin was a friend of Max, and he has told us that he has never acted like this before, and this was another character from even Justin. But Max told me that since we do had a close classes together, he will always be around to make sure that Justin doesn't act out of his revenge plans or what else he had in mind. And Even though Sabrina told me to tell someone about these threats, just in case if Justin would even act out of it. But I told her he wouldn't even dare to do anything at me as long as I'm in college. Because the school has security cameras and security staff that will be around. There are like hundreds of students on the hallways and on the campus, and there are always the teachers around, so he would even dare do anything. And boy, I was wrong on that statement alone itself. Because even though I felt more safe now when Max told me that he would be around as much as possible he could, even Sabrina told herself, but even when Sabrina did want to tell me, tell someone, principal, a teacher. And boy, I should have listened to her statement and her warning, because only a few days after Justin's call, but he said, well, I was in the hallway just myself, and there was no one else there, not even a student, and it was just a calm afternoon. And then suddenly, around the corner, who showed up but Justin? But he didn't act any screaming me or didn't even look angrily. He would just casually walked up to me and talked to me as we were old friends, or as we were back together or something. And even though he was a very, very handsome young man, but there's something in his eyes that I can't describe. It's like looking into an empty soul of an angry demon or something. But he would just casually say, "Oh, hey Serena, can I have a moment?" Even though I hesitated to just to talk to him, but I unluckily agreed. But even though I did step maybe just one step backwards, but he did move. Because normally I would have probably said something, I really don't want to talk to you, but I agreed. And he asked if it was possible that we could go out, maybe grab something to eat or drink, just maybe a coffee or something. And even though I wasn't really hesitated to say no, but he agreed to at least go to his school campus cafe, and I agreed. Since I didn't have any class for another 2 hours, and so I actually agreed. And we went to a small cafe that school has. We ordered coffee together and we sat down, and then he told me that the reason why he has been acting out this before, and he also felt sorry about his threats, he didn't meant it because he told me that he had his anger issues, and this was the first news that he ever told anyone about this, apparently, because he felt very embarrassed to even mention these issues to anyone. But then I asked him, well, if you had been close friends with Max, why hadn't you mentioned this to him? After all, if you're close friends. But he said that even despite your close friends, that he felt still embarrassed to even tell his old friend about this anger issues. But then I asked him, how long have you been having these anger issues? He said it for almost his entire life so far. Even though when he was younger, he had this huge outburst and he could smack almost anyone, especially when he was in elementary school. Between the first and the third grade, he could attack any of his classmates if they said something wrong or if they said a joke that he felt insulting or something like that. And his parents has been told about his behavior. They should probably tell me grab into some sort of anger anger management control program or something. But over since he went back to, when he went to middle school, he told me that he was having some at least get better control of his anger. Even when they did have his anger issues happening or even outbursts, he had been trained to just leave, back off, or at least leave their place, the area, so that he would just calm down. And throughout the middle school and the high school, it worked. But ever since when he came to college, when he saw me, and ever since then, he never had any serious problem. And I was like, at least like in my mind, he was at least, if he had no problems back then, probably perhaps maybe he had moved on. But when this all that stuff happened again when after he saw me talking to other guys, even if just classmates, completely innocent. What I mentioned is to Matt to Justin that you should be expecting me talking to other guys because they're classmates. If I had been assigned to a school assignment with some guys classmates, it is something I can't do about, and you should expect me to be able to talk to be in at least talk to other guys because this is a big college. There are a lot of guys here, and even though I have no interest in any romantically involved with any of those guys, and I was like very serious about this. And he suddenly agreed. And I told him, if we will ever go back to be together, he should have been allowed to stop being such controlling. He should be allowed me to have just been talking to male friends. If he can even tolerate that, we wouldn't even shouldn't be together. And surprising enough, he actually agreed on that. And he then asked for a second chance to try again. Even I felt, even at one, even though I would feel very regretful to say yes. He smiled and actually said thanks and gave me a kiss and said that we will go out on a date on Friday. And even though I didn't tell Sabrina or Max about this meeting with him or that we were back together, but it wouldn't take long for them to find out because one afternoon when I was in our room, I was just sitting in my bed reading, and Sabrina just walked in. She looked seriously scared, and she said like on the lines of, "Serena, don't tell me you did it." I was pretty confused what she was even first talking about, and I was like, "What do you mean? Are you serious? You just backed up with Justin, despite what he did?" Well, I told him what he told me, and then she told me he never actually had any such out. He told me he didn't have an outburst, or at least I controlled his anger. But according to at least Max, Justin did have a few serious anger outbursts, even in high school. But it was nothing as serious that he would been had to been talked about. But it was something like that, on those lines. I was I wasn't really surprised, but I said, well, at least they had given me a promise to not be acting like this. But Sabrina told me, you shouldn't be in this. You should be avoiding him at all costs. But I said, that would be almost impossible. We have a few classes together, and now we're middle of halfway through the school year, and it's impossible to just doing that. And boy, I was wrong on that one though. I mean, I could always been asked a teacher to have a different classes, or if he could been switched out of class, but I wasn't even aware if you can actually do that though by the time. But I will know this later on because after my date on Friday with Justin, things started acting like normal. Even when he saw me talking to just another guy in the hallway, but he was just on the way in his room, he only said good evening and just walked in. And even though that should alone been a red flag for Justin to be freaked out, but Justin wasn't even acting because he admit he was only said good evening and he didn't just walked in, and I was actually agreeing. I accepted it. But his old behavior, it didn't take long to resurface again. Because after the years of being back together for only like 2 weeks, his old behavior started to re-emerge once again, but this time in even more stronger a case. I was like, I was dumbfounded when I found out when he was just standing outside my dorm, my own room, and I was like, oh hey Justin, before I even finish anything, He grabbed me my arm and said, and is almost screaming. And there are a few words I prefer not to be mentioned here because were mostly profanities words, and I prefer not to be using those. But he said something in the words like, "I told you not to be cheating on me with anyone." And he was like screaming and screaming all the same thing over and over. And I tried to defend myself. I didn't cheat. But he said, "You did." But who? And then he said, "I was talking to two guys in the hallway just after class." I was like, "Justin, they are my classmates. And I told you that you should be allowed to be talking to guys, and you agreed to let me to do so." And he said, "I never agreed to that one." And there was screaming again, calling me a cheater, cheater. And I was like, and I managed to push him off from myself and said, "Justin, just leave and cool down." And I walked back in my room, locked the door just in case if he would try to get in there. But he left after I locked the door. But after I told Sabrina, she immediately informed me I should inform someone else. And she said, "If you don't, I will." And this time I actually listened to her warnings because I told her I will. The next day, just after the class, or after my math class that I had with Justin, he saw me talking to just one other guy who's walked up to me, and this time, this Justin told this guy, "Back off, she's my girlfriend, not yours, leave her alone." And this guy was totally freaked out, was scared of Justin. Because Justin seemed to be a little bit taller, this guy, and this guy just walked off. And Justin then said, "I should tell you, if the next guy who ever do this again, you will have a serious issue with me." And then he slapped my face and he just walked off angrily. But what he didn't know, my teacher, Mr. Johnson, who is my math teacher, saw it happen. And he was asking me if something was wrong. And this time, I broke down crying. And he literally saw me being slapped in the face and saw me crying the and how Justin was acting and especially threatening one of the students. That was one thing that he could not tolerate. And I told him everything, including what happened before my first breakout with Justin and about things that really led up to it. And Mr. Johnson, he was a cool man in his age. He was actually one of my top favorite teachers at the school. He told me I should tell the principal about this event. But and I told him no one actually was going to believe me. But he told me, "Well, I'm a witness. I saw what happened, and I will agree with the principal." And in fact, he told me that since I had no class right afterwards, he should probably went accompany with the trip principal, and he did. So both me and Mr. Johnson informed the principal what happened, and the principal, he wasn't happy about this because this was the line that Justin had crossed big time. So he told me that he will have Justin suspended for 2 weeks about this event. But that same afternoon, when I went back to my room, I was there with Sabrina and we were just talking, and I had told her what happened. But as we were talking, my phone was ringing, and I was stunned. And I was really not so surprised it was actually going to be Justin. And I was like, "It's Justin. Just ignore it. No, I just want to hear him talking." So I had the phone on speakers, and he's like, "Justin," before he said, "You had me suspended for 2 weeks. What you did is unforgettable." Before he could even finish, Sabrina interrupted and said, "Justin, this is all your fault. You did this. She didn't do anything. She has been treating you with respect, kindness, and always being not and faithful. You are the one who's interrupting her, calling her a cheater, attacking other guys who would even try to talk to her. This is something you should not do, not have done. And especially when you promised her that you would be allowing her to talk to guys, but when you said you aren't allowing, and this is now that. And then she was done, and I was said, Justin, be my favor, lose my number, and I'm not going to talk to you anymore because we are done. And don't try to call me because after this, I'm blocking your number. And I hang up before he could say anything and block the number. And sure enough, he tried to call me numerous times that night, but my phone didn't allow it. And even when for the next 2 weeks, I felt at least more relief that he was not allowed to be on the campus property. But even so, even that he was suspended for 2 weeks, and the principal had informed me that despite he didn't do any physical harm to any of the other students, but only when he did assault with this guy from the pizzeria, but even so, I was very stunned that the principal was his hands was tied on this case. But I even though felt scared because in the last few days after before the 2 weeks was over, I was scared that Justin would be back and take revenge on me. And even though Sabrina told me that Max or one of his male friends will be like my bodyguards until that happens, or just in case. I told him that I very much appreciate it, but maybe it's not necessary because I don't believe that he will even be back after they suspended for 2 weeks. And I was so wrong because on the week after his two suspended was over, I saw him in class. When he saw me, he made a smile as nothing had happened. But I usually sit next to him or maybe behind him, but I didn't this time. I actually felt so panicking. I was having a panic attack. So I told the teacher I was going to the nurse's office because I didn't feel well. The teacher allowed me go, and when he said that, I could see the smile on Justin's face drop almost in like anger. And even at the nurse's office, she told me I did have a panic attack because she had experienced this of other students before, but she was really curious to know exactly what's been causing this. She first asked if there was any stress from studying. I said no. I told her briefly what was been happening, and she was stunned and very supportive, telling me that this is not the first time she has been been experienced this. But she told me that if something would happen, she would be at least a witness of any case. And I told her I appreciate it. But so long story short, for next couple of weeks, I did see Justin in the hallways, in the classrooms, in the library, in outside my own doorway, the hallway of my room. But he never approached me for any reason, and his phone calls, text messages had just stopped, and I felt very relieved of freedom once again. But even so, I knew that he was around because I did see him almost everywhere I went on the campus. Even when I was off campus, if I went to a small grocery store to buy food for me and Sabrina, or if I was out of town if I was in town with Sabrina, just hanging out, Justin was always around. And even Justin was just, even though he was looking around the corner of a building, he was always a distant. And Sabrina felt very nervous because she mentioned something. What if he was just stalking us, and especially me, and he was waiting for prepared for the right moment to attack me, or maybe, or even worse, killing me for betraying him? That statement also made me a bit hesitating and having an anxious, almost a panic attack. Because even every time when my phone did ring, and it said new number or something, I was panicking that he made a new number. But even so, I was. very terrified. But then, during my sophomore year, I actually had moved on from Justin. And in fact, during my sophomore year, I actually fell in love with this guy who was also one of my classmates, Brandon. Brandon was around the same age, and he was a very teddy bear. He was not the type of doing a conflict or if anyone threatened him, he would even do anything to harm. Even though he was trained in Taekwondo, but he would only use that as a last resort if something would happen. When somehow Justin found out me and Brandon had been dating for a while, he's kept up his stalking a distance, and every time I saw him, he looked furious. It's like I belonged to him and no one else. And one night, I actually was studying up late. I was alone. I actually have this note under my door, and I was like, who had done this? Opened the door, looked around both one of the directions and the hallway, but no one. And I opened the note indoors, I closed the door, locked the door, and read a note that said, in the lines of, "You are mine. Leave, or I take care of him." And I already knew it was from Justin. But unfortunately, without being signed of him, there was nothing I could do, or I couldn't even prove it's actually from him. So even though I showed this to Brandon and Sabrina and Max, they all agreed this is from Max, from Justin. But Sabrina said, "There's nothing you could do. Even as long as it's signed and not signed by him, there's nothing we can do about it." So I didn't tell anyone. But as it does, the months went on and on. He's kept up with his stalking at distance, and some of the notes did appear under my door or in my locker, but always the same, almost the same note, almost every single answer or message. "You will be mine one day soon," and none of them were even signed either. Despite the notes, I felt terrified. But at least I felt a bit more comfortable when I was with Brandon, even if I was on campus or off campus. At least he was able to defend himself and me with his Taekwondo black belt. And that was probably the only thing that actually kept Justin away from us. Because when he found out that Brandon has a black belt in Taekwondo, he knew that Brandon would be easily been taking care of him without at ease. So that was probably the only thing that kept him from doing anything harm. And I felt really happy with that. I felt at least safe, protected, and at least had some freedom again. But unfortunately, none of that wouldn't last for any particular long. As I feared. Ever since my breakup between me and Brandon, I was very afraid that Justin would somehow find out about the breakup. And ever since the breakup, it was the very first time ever since me and Brandon as a couple where I felt safe. But now without him around me, I was feeling unsafe and very much nervous, nervous, feared, terrified all the same time. And especially, I was even worried that when, as soon as Justin would find out about my breakup, he would keep stalking me a lot more than he used to do before with while I was still with Brandon. And my fear showed me that I was correct. Because shortly after my breakup with Brandon, somehow Justin found out about it and he could continue to stalk me from a distance, even though he didn't send me any messages on the phone anymore. But just after my breakup, I started getting messages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And it was from new accounts. Each time I blocked them, but always new ones have been appearing on Instagram, and it was no picture, no followers, nothing. They were only like message, only a message that's saying, "I'm watching you. You will be mine." And even I immediately know it was Justin. But there was nothing else I could do other than just report these accounts and block them. And those continued going on for almost months. And I was getting more and more nervous and feared. I was even considering to just drop out of college and move back home. But even though that would not probably would have been stopped by the end of Justin's continuous following me, stalking me, and any of that. And even Sabrina and Max said, even if I did drop out of from college and move back home, there would not be not necessary meaning that Justin would stop. As Max said something like, even if you do move back home, his continuous stalking you online might just continues. Sure, he might be able to stalk you, but you might feel safe because you're miles away from him. But he might even continue and perhaps even follow you back to your hometown. And that was something I really was fearing the most. After all, considering that he had this violence tendencies and his controlling in behavior, especially when he almost beat this pizza delivery guy during my freshman year. It is no matter. There's no way to say for sure how he would act out if anyone tried to defend me against him. Not even my own friends. Even though Max and Sabrina told me just perhaps put your accounts private or make new ones without having your name or anything on it. I was considering doing that and actually agreed. Because ever since I deleted my original accounts, I make new ones, but make sure they have nothing to have anything tie me to college or my hometown or anything but my name or anything. That stopped. But as I did fear that if Justin wouldn't have any ways to reach out to me or even saw me or see me online, my activities, he will lose his mind. And I was right, because his stalking continued even more. But this time, he literally walked up to me just after class and said, "Serena, please, I'm begging you. I want to be with you. You're my soulmate. I want to be with you." And then he just did something that I really didn't expect it. He went on his knees and showed me a ring and said, "I want to marry you, Serena." And even when Max and Sabrina was also there, they saw this, and Sabrina was very terrified because she knows that if I say no, he would freak out. But Max said, "Dude, this is out of line. Don't. Stop doing that. You don't mean it at all. At all." But Max, he just keep on and on to telling Justin to just back off. But Justin, he just ignored his own friend for this. And I looked at Justin, it was felt almost an eternity, and I said, "Justin, no. I will never marry you, and please stop stalking me. I will never going to be back with you. You're a creep." I told him loudly. People around me saw it happen, and they even started wondering what is even going on. And luckily though, one of the people who saw this was actually Mr. Johnson, my favorite teacher. And he walked up to Justin and said, "Justin, you had to go to the principal's office right now." But Justin stood up and said, "Huh, as Alice listened to you. And they tried to walk away. And Justin said, once again, he turned around and said, Serena, you will be mine, no matter what. In one other way, you will be mine. You hear me? You will be mine. And after that, he walked away. And that was actually the last time anyone saw Justin for at least a while. Because after that day, he didn't show up to college for at least about almost a week. And then something he never, and he came back almost after a week again. People started wondering what in the world is going on. And principal couldn't do much else either. But even when Justin went back, somehow he ignored me. He didn't even try to approach me, never trying to approach me online, anywhere. I felt for once a little bit safer, but I was never letting my guard down, not for a second, because every time when I was out somewhere, I always keep my eyes open, looking around each corner, hoping that he is not there to approach me or attack me or anything, but nothing. And even throughout that, I was for once feeling safe. And during my sophomore year, I for once held first the first part of the year I felt terrified. But during Christmas break holiday, I went back to my hometown. My family had been completely aware of Justin's behavior. At first, they liked him, but after he started doing this, my father, who was a former veteran of the, he has been in battles and many conflicts before in his past, and he's a Marine. He's a Marine veteran, and he knows what kind of behavior that can be leading up to. And he had told me always be prepared for anything that could lead up to Justin's bad behavior. And I did tell my dad that no matter what he would do, Justin's will always be behind my back. No matter what I tried. Even my mom was very terrified. And something I should have brought up what happened during my sophomore year's winter holiday break, because only a few days after I get home, I actually had this nightmare that Justin had somehow had tracked my parents' home address and somehow was standing outside my window in the middle of the night. And that nightmare kept woke me up, and for some unreasonable, I can't explain it, I had a sense to just walk up to my bedroom window and look out. Sure, I had my blinds down, but I used a little bit gap just my bedroom window was facing the street, and it was snow. I could see there was some street lights on above, and I was expecting maybe to find no one out there, but sure enough, on the other side of the street, behind some cars, I see this figure crouching down between the cars and just looking at my house. But my room was dark, so whoever this person were wouldn't have been able to see me. And I was like, God no, let's not hope that's Justin. And as I was doing this, this person was just still there, and I managed to sneak into my parents' bedroom, shook my dad up, told him someone is on this across the street. And as we were doing that, my dad woke immediately up. He grabbed his handgun that he had in his nightstand, and as we were walking towards the front door, we saw now this person had actually moved and was standing on the sidewalk on our part of the street and facing our door, at least our house. And but but it limit our light from the street lights, I could see who it actually were, and my fear was telling me I was right the whole time. This nightmare had woken me up as something I can't explain. But it was Justin. Justin was standing out on my street. and he was looking at my house. But then the front door opened, and my dad walked out. And at first, he pretended that he was looking for something on the front door. And Justin, he just stood there, and then he said, "You leave now. The police had already been called," my dad bluffed, and pointing his handgun at the person. And this person stood there for only a few seconds, and before then, a person took off. But I know for sure it was Justin. But even despite this very limit, the dim light from the street lights, and it was still dark enough to even to see because this person was had a hood on, and I told my dad it was probably Justin. But then my dad asked me, if I had told him my home address? But I told him no. I only told him where he knew at least my hometown's name, but I never actually gave him the exact home address because it was in early of my relationship with him, and now this was very much dangerous. My dad agreed. Justin's behavior was really radical and also uncontrollable anger issues. After all, once he had attacked one innocent guy, and he had verbally abused several of my classmates because they were just talking to me. And even when he was one a teacher told him to come to go to the principal's office, but he didn't. But now my dad had enough. Because as soon as the college was back up and running in the spring, he called the principal and told them what had been happening. And the principal this time took it very serious because he also had enough. So as I was being back this spring, I was expecting to see Justin somewhere else on the campus. But for the first few days when I went back, I didn't see anyone. I didn't see him anywhere. Not in the classrooms, not in the cafeteria. I even asked around, but no one actually had seen him. Until I ran into Mr. Johnson. I asked him if he had heard anything about Justin, and it turns out Justin had been expelled due to my dad had been calling the principal about his statement. And for once I felt being relieved. But not all that. He has also been forbidden to even have put his foot on the school property, and that made me feel at least more safer. And I actually told Sabrina and Max about it. They were also agreed this was probably for the best. Even though at first I felt a bit of fear that Justin would sneak into the school property at night and maybe go to my hallway to my door and sneak in, or maybe try to do a break in and attack me in sleep, or attack me at school property or anywhere on campus. So I had asked Max or one of his male friends if they could be like one of my bodyguards, and they didn't hesitate because they had known about Matt Justin's behavior, and they agreed that was a bit creepy, but also a bit uncontrollable anger about him. So, rest of the first for a few months after I came back in spring, I was looking around almost every corner, and I always make sure my door room was locked, even when I was home. I was really feeling paranoid that Justin would return, even despite being expelled from the college, that he would pop out around the corner of each building, or if I was anywhere. Even in fact, I felt even fear of leaving school property. Even each time when Sabrina had asked me if I want to go with her to the movies or just go out to the mall, and I felt that I felt so feared that Justin would be waiting for me if I left town or if the school property. But I told her no. Even though Max and Sabrina told me that I was going to feeling, I was feeling much fear or at least paranoia, but they understood my fear, so they understood, so they didn't try to bribe me to leave school campus. But after a while, though, I never actually saw Justin anywhere even near school property, and in fact, I haven't even heard anything about him. Not on the phone, not on social media, nothing. And in fact, I even looked him up, but he has deleted all his social media. I was like stunned. First of all, he had this in mind to keep a tab on me every single activity online or even at school at all times. When I looked him up, he was completely gone off on social media. And when I mentioned this to Sabrina and Max, they were also stunned. But after a while, though, they both agreed maybe this was probably for the best. So after a while, I started feeling much more safer around Ili's school on a school campus. But after a while, after that, ever since I haven't seen or heard about Justin for months after I returned back to spring, I decided I should start living my life as I intend to do. Focus my studies, and perhaps even get a part-time job, and just focus on my life and not being feared every single second. And agreed on that. Even when Sabrina told me I should listen to my mind for once. And I did. So shortly afterwards, I actually applied for this part-time job for this small grocery store in town, and actually loved the job. Even if it was only part-time, but I had some at least a sort of income that may could help me pay some rents or stuff like that, or maybe one if I were to buy something. And eventually, I started to move on. I for once after ever since Justin just vanished, I felt I felt safe. I actually had my freedom back again. Even though at first I still felt a bit paranoid that he would show up. But eventually that feeling would fade away. Since I never saw Justin or even heard about him, but one day I actually heard from a friend of mine, or at least a classmate, that Justin had left town. I was dumbfounded. Maybe that was the reason why I haven't seen Justin anywhere in town or even heard about him. But then when I asked where Justin had moved, this classmate of mine couldn't even tell me because she wasn't even she didn't even know herself. And when I told Max and Sabrina this, they were also a bit surprised because they also heard about this, and maybe that's the reason why we never heard of anything about from Justin. And that was maybe something that Max stated. Perhaps that's the reason why he's not no longer social media. And perhaps that was the right, because ever since he was gone, I didn't have any to fear anymore, and I was feeling free. And I had informed my parents of all this, and they also felt at least relieved. But my dad told me just in case, never let my guard down because who knows, he could show up. And he might be right about that, but I actually had my guard up all the time. But I also felt relaxed and just been living my life again. And eventually, I finished my studies at college and I actually felt happy to have fulfilled that dream. And my parents also felt at least proud and happy that I had complete my studies at being at college. Even after that, I decided to move back home, and I did. I lived with my parents for some time until I could find my own place. And actually, it was actually thanks to my dad who helped me to find my job, my first official job. I was going to work as a receptionist at this local hotel because the hotel owner was actually an old friend of my dad, and he actually hired me after he had this short interview, and I loved the place. All the staff was very kind, and the customers was always friendly. Well, may have been a few customers that may have been a bit rude, but not as even as far as not worse as Justin had been. And even during my stay there, I actually started dating this young guy from my hometown by the name Jack, and Jack was completely opposite from Justin. Jack was a great guy. He felt very safe. He treated me like a princess. And in fact, Jack has also had completed college from a different city. And around the time when me and Jack would start dating, Sabrina had also moved back home with Max as her fiance because they got engaged shortly after college, and I was really happy to see that. And I even treated Max as a brother because ever since we were in college, he looked after me, and that I really appreciate. Everything was looking perfect fine for me. I mean, I had a perfect job, a well-paid salary every time, and I even had this great guy in my life. And eventually, we had our own apartment. But eventually, as many fairy tales, things were not going to plans. Because one day, as I was sitting in receptionist, this stranger walked up, and I was as polite as always saying, "Welcome to this hotel. What can I help?" And I stopped mid sentence. There stood a guy, around the same age, very familiar looking. I couldn't put it where I could seen this guy before. When he spoke, "Hey Serena, it has been a while, hasn't it? Do I know you? Ah, you probably forgot about me. It's me, Justin." And from what seeing Justin in front of me, I felt equal terror in my heart. I was shaking but trying to act calmly and professional. "So, are you looking to rent a room for a night?" "Actually, no. I heard you were working here, and I just wanted to, come by to say hi and just talk like old times." And okay, um, but then another customer was walking in. "I'm sorry, Justin, but I have another customer to take care of." "Oh, no, no worries. Well, may I see you around?" And I was really stunned that Justin was there in my hometown, even though he knew where I now lived there still. But how would he even know? Because the last time I checked, his social media was gone, unless he had made new ones but a different name. That would make sense. But anyways, I put it behind me, and when I get home, I told Jack about this, and he knew about Justin's behavior in the past, even though he had never seen this guy. He was very surprised, but was also a bit worried. If Justin had showed up again after all this time, it's only a matter of time before he was right to ask me out again, or perhaps if I could back to him. But I would never do that. But since knowing that how about Justin's behavior in the past, it's unlike I would ever do that. Now I have this great guy in my life, Jack. Jack supported my idea to always keep an eye open for if Justin would do anything. And then it took me about 2 weeks when Justin came back, and he was like surprised. He was very polite this time as well. But then he asked me if I want maybe to go out with him, just as a date, and maybe try again, a third time for the fact. But I told him, "No, I'm afraid that's not gonna happen, Justin." I told him that I already were in love with someone else, and I have been dating this guy for a while now, and we living together, and we in fact perhaps even will get married eventually soon enough. And even though that might usually would piss off Justin, but he acted very calmly for once, very surprisingly unlike his behavior. And he said like someone like in the lines of, "Oh, um, I'm surprised. Uh, I hope he treat you with respect as he will deserve to be." And he just left. But the same evening, I received a message on Facebook. It was actually from Justin. He actually sent a friend request. I was very hesitating to even accept or block him, But when I actually asked Jack for advice, and since Justin seems to be felt serious about him, but I actually decided to accept his friend request, which I right now regret I ever did, because even though at first Justin acted normally, we just only had a friendly conversation now and then, just having just normal, asking how my day had been, how my work has been so far, what I felt about how we finished college, and I asked about him. Turns out he moved away because after being expelled, which I felt he felt I'm sorry about that happened. I was in a bad mental statement or state at the time, and I needed to get away from that, get away from that, and leave town. And now felt I had the better control my anger issues, and I'm ready to find someone else to be with. Even now, I know that was just another act of his, hoping I would try to leave Jack and to be with him. When I mentioned to Jack about this to Justin that Jack is always kind to me, how he treats me, even though I know Justin is like very angrily, almost want to scream, and even though he acted calmly and said Jack sounds like a great guy, he is a very polite one, that he will treat me with such respect. But one day, when I was just talking with Justin online, on Facebook, just normal, when he once again asked me if I would just go out with him for coffee in town. Just a first conference, just a small talk. And I actually agreed on that. So we showed up both at this small cafe, not far from my work during my break, and we actually had this decent conversation. Once again, though, he asked me out on a date, and he asked if we could try again to be a couple. But I once again said firmly, "I'm sorry, Justin, but I'm with Jack." That when he flipped out. What is the bad about Jack more than me? I mean, I am much better than him. I am even much good looking, and I have work decent enough money I can support for you and ourselves. That was a lie, though. He was employee and had no official job at the time. But I said, no, Justin, I love Jack. And in fact, Jack is even much better than you are. Back in college, you treated me as garbage. You couldn't even respect my freedom and even do anything. And that made him even more furious. And I said, Justin, bye. Bye. I'm not want to see or even talk to you. Don't try to talk to me ever again. And then I just left, paid for my things and left. But that was not the last time I was even going to see of Justin. Because even the same evening, Justin tried to reach out to me once again on Facebook. I should have blocked him as soon as I got home from work or anything, but I never did. For a reason I don't know. And he asked me forgiveness and asked, "I'm sorry about my outburst. I just freaked out. I'm sorry." But then I told him, once again, please contact me ever again. This is the final saying, and I don't want to talk to you ever again. And I blocked him. And I thought maybe that was the last time I was going to hear or see him. But it didn't. And I actually heard from a friend of mine who lived in town that Justin had moved in this small apartment not far from where I live. I was very not fear. Now that he lived not far from me, close by, and knows where I work, and knows about Jack. And I'm afraid that Jack would have been attacked by him. But what I didn't know at first that Jack, he actually is a black belt in in Taekwondo himself too. And I felt a little relief because I told Jack about this and that Justin might would try to attack him or something if he's alone. And then he said he will be in for a big surprise. And I knew what he meant. Even though I really felt scared of Jack's safety, but it wouldn't been as much any far from my original belief on that though. Because ever since Justin had once again came back in my life, I was still a bit nervous and even get a bit paranoid. Even when I mentioned it to Sabrina and Max, they were both stunned that Justin had literally came back and also living in my hometown. Sabrina was really terrified that Justin was back. And even when my family was told about this, my dad was so furious. He said, like in the words of, I will bring my handgun and go to his apartment, make sure he leaves town permanently. Unless if it doesn't, I will drag him out of this town and inform him. Ever soon he's put his foot back here, I will know about it and I'm sure he doesn't return. Even I know my dad would make those kind of threats, but he would never even actually put through those. He was only looking after his only daughter. And I understand, and that is one thing why I love my dad. Even though he's a former Marine, but he can be a big teddy bear. But when it comes to his family, if someone threatens them, he will take this personally on that level. But I told my dad, as long as he hasn't done anything to harm me or even make any sort of threats, because even though the only time when he threatened me, well, we were at this cafe, but that was the only time. But as long as then, I had even actually seen or heard him ever since then. But Jack was actually a little bit nervous about him around because it happened that he has seen Justin around his workshop. He was working as mechanic in town, and he was a little bit nervous. But he was at least not being too worried because as long as he was at work around a few of his friends, he has not much to worry about. But things would eventually change a lot because when me and Jack had been together for 2 years, he took me out on a romantic restaurant when he asked me if I want to marry him, and I said yes immediately. And as soon as I made it official status on Facebook, and even showed a picture of me and Jack being with our rings, I know that Justin might have saw it because only a few days after our engagement news, he came to my job and I was expecting him to be calmly as before, but as I was sitting there in the reception area, just working and make sure that was all the things were taken care of, when I saw him, he looked angry. Unlike the first times when he came to my work, when he looked at least happy. He literally walked rushly up to the desk and he said, You are making a big mistake, Serena. You're not gonna marry this guy. You're going to marry me. We made a promise that back in January college. You remember that? But in fact, I never actually made any promise that I would actually even marry Justin. It was only a thought that I had with when we were start dating that if he was this very kind, perhaps I could eventually marry this guy. But after he started being having his anger issues and all that, I had those minds changed. And I said to Jack, to Justin, strongly but firmly, but also the calmest tone as possible. I said, in the words of Justin, that is never going to happen. And I never actually told you I'm never going to marry you. And I never made that kind of promise. You lied! You made a promise! You told me so! You made it all up. But Justin didn't back off. He continued screaming at me that we are meant to be. He is my soulmate. That I am his soulmate. His true love. We're gonna have a big family together and moving in together soon enough. And I was starting feeling generally unsafe, and there were no other customers in the lobby at the time. Sure, my manager was behind it in this room I was behind of, and he overheard this, and he called for security. And before security could even do anything, Justin left, and he was told that he has been banned from the property. And that was the last time he even showed up at my workplace. And I informed my manager, my boss, what's been happening and who Justin were. And I even making a brief mentioning about he done back in college. And he actually backed my statement up because he overheard his statements and he could see that this guy was very much mental unstable. Because as he was screaming, almost laughing, screaming type of meaning, like almost like a maniac. And he told me that kind of person is very mental unstable and that I should not leave my job, at least alone. So make sure that the security guard goes with you to your car each night after your shift. And just to make sure. And it was probably for the best because that same evening after Justin left the place that I was banned for, I saw him in the parking lot and first he saw me walking toward my car and he was about to approach me, but when he saw the security guard behind me, he had another different mind walking, and then turned around and almost quickly ran away. And the security guard saw it, but I told him not to do anything about it. It's not worth it. He has already been banned for the property, and the security guard has been aware about this guy, at least of his general description, how he looks like. So each time they saw this guy in the close to that, they will make sure that he's not been allowed. And the manager and the owner, two different guys, had made agreement that now Justin was not only banned from step inside the hotel, but he was also banned from even go any near the property, including the parking lot. But despite this, I was having the security guard go back to my car each night for almost a month. But even though I didn't see Justin anywhere, but it was no guarantee that he wasn't hiding somewhere, just waiting for the security guard will let me alone. But I never saw him. And for some reason, when I heard from a friend of mine who lives in the area where Justin supposed to be living, he had moved out. And I was surprised. I asked why he was reason. It turns out he was evicted. He hadn't even paid his rent in almost in few weeks. And that was the reason why he was evicted fast. Not only that, he was affecting some of the neighbors because they were playing too loud or they were talking too loud. That was another reason that he was, as my managers quoted, as mental unstable. And I totally agreed on that one now. But all this changed after when he found out me and Jack were now engaged. And I was really feared that something would happen because we eventually made our plans. We actually set the dates, the day for our wedding, and it was in summer the next year. And I was afraid that he would even show up, but he makes sure that I always been aware, and we only invited only a few friends and a few family friends that we knew of. But we also had informed every single guest if they saw this guy, and we had showed them a picture of him, that if he ever showed up even near their home, their families, always report it to police because he is a mental unstable maniac, or at least a nutcase, as some of my friends would call him. And I didn't, that statement that he is a nutcase, I didn't disagree. I actually agreed on that one. Even one time when I was just at work, this guy walked in and he looked very similar as Justin. And I was very afraid that was actually him. But I asked for his ID just to be in case, and it turned out to be a completely different guy. And I explained briefly why, and he laughed and said, "Understatement, understandable." And that guy actually turned out to be a good guy, and he was actually turns out later on to be a very good cook because it turns out he was working at a local restaurant in our town, and yeah, that's he ended up to be a good friend of mine later on in life. But I'm getting off the topic here. But Justin, the last I heard that he was kicked out from his apartment, and I'm wondering where it was taking place now. there were at least one homeless shelter in town, and a friend of mine who actually sometimes worked there as, or a family friend who works there as voluntarily, she had been told how he looks like and even a photograph of him, but never saw him. And she even asked around of the homeless people they have ever saw this guy on the street or the park or anywhere, but no one. Even though they usually don't want to rat out, to snitch out any others, but most of them did say that never actually saw him. And he was all they also been told if they see this guy, stay away from him. He is mental unstable, and he will not hesitate to attack people. Normally people should not be doing this, but my family friend actually felt obligated to tell the rest of the public that this guy could have been mental unstable and that she was right. Because even though the homeless people may not have had official home themselves, but she wanted to look after them as well. And she was doing right though. But I later find out that he was living with an old friend in town. And this friend was complete aware of Justin's past behavior, but still let them live there. Only that even though he didn't pay any rent, but only that allowing him to stay there as long he helped around in the home, like doing dishes and all that, for free. So, and it turns out it was across town, at least a ways away from my life, or where I was living at the time. But then the wedding day came, about almost a year later. I was so looking forward, but something would eventually happen. Because on the day when I was about to be married, I actually was standing with Sabrina and Max in my room. I was finished and was getting ready for the wedding. Even though most friends was like, "What is a guy standing with the bride and the bridesmaid?" Well, he was only there to just talk to Sabrina, and since he was not since he was not my soon husband, which is the court tradition not to be allowed to see each other, but he's a male friend, and I did allow that to happen. But as he soon both of them left, something happened. Only I think it was maybe as 20 minutes later, or was it could have been 10 minutes. I actually heard someone run into this door, and it was Sabrina. She was terrified. Her eyes was big. I asked her what happened, and all she can say was, "Jack stabbed." I asked her to be clearly, "What do you mean, Jack stabbed?" And it turns out, while Jack was outside with Max just to get some fresh air before the wedding, someone literally walked up to them and stabbed Jack 3 times with a small blade, and this person just took off running. And before Max or anyone else could even react, he literally screamed, "Help!" many times. And soon enough, Jack was having been forced to be rushing into hospital because he had been stabbed 3 times. Soon the police was called, and despite that this person was standing so only a few inches away from Max's face, he couldn't see the persons behind it. The person was wearing gloves and having this hoodie over his face, and couldn't even see this individual's face. And there was a manhunt. I was stunned, terrified. I first going to believe I was going to lose my own soon husband. But I was totally wrong that Jack made it through. And we postponed the wedding until Jack was made a full recover, which everyone agreed. But what about this individual who stabbed Jack? But only one person in my mind could have done it. Justin. We informed the police, Justin. But still, without Max saw his person's face, and there were no other cameras or any witnesses, There was nothing else I could have done. After all, there was nothing else. They literally found the knife, though, in an alleyway, just only short distance from the church. But since the persons were wearing gloves, there were no fingerprints, no DNA at all, except for Jack's blood on it. Everyone was very upset about this. And I eventually wanted to confront Justin, to have him to admit he was the one who attacked him. But my family and my best friend Sabrina told me that was the absolute the worst idea I would ever could even come up with. They told me like, Serena, are you really stupid? Or you really want to meet this unstable ex-boyfriend of yours? And I'm expecting him to admit? Well, do you have any other better idea? I asked, told them. But my dad was firmly said, my daughter of mine would never do that. Let me do it. Dad, if he's seen you, you know what he will take off. And if that is probably worst, even though I did something against my family and friends' uh, uh, objections, I actually went behind their backs. It was probably for the best. I didn't want to have my dad involved in this or have him arrested for murder of Justin. But even though if I wish that could happen, but it's just my only thoughts about it. But he he would even do it though. My dad would even kill Justin because of what he had been doing. He would rather see him in jail for life rather than him being dead. But like I said, I went behind my family and friends' backs. I actually called Justin and asked him to meet up at the park. And he actually somehow agreed. And then at first, I just won't have this. Even though I was feeling very such strong anger, fear, I just wanted to strangle him myself. But in all this anger, I actually asked him just randomly if he was even in the area of the church and that if he heard what happened. And he admitted that he heard about it. After all, that was in the local news, so he had actually heard from that way, he said. And that's something I could not deny that he never had heard of. But after the small talk, I actually then asked, are you still serious about us being together? And he said, yes, I would do anything for you. What he didn't know, I was actually recording this the whole time. Even if it meant, like, I don't know, make sure this other person would never be returned back. If you mean, like, you know, taking this person out officially, like ending this person's life, then yeah. So, would you even have done this to Jack though? He was hesitating to even to answer that first, but then he actually admitted, yes, I was the one in gloves and that hoodie that he did would make sure. I was surprised that Max didn't even saw it was me. I said it 3 times because it was to only make sure that he wouldn't survive. But Justin didn't know though, because the Night magazine, even the newspaper, never mentioned it. Jack pulled through. He managed to recover. This conversation happened just only like 2 days after he was when Jack was stabbed. So this was something that Justin would even have known about. So with the recording, I said, "I'm sorry, I had to go back home. Um, my mom would need me help or something, but I may to see you soon." Yeah, I would like that. He said with a smile and actually gave me a hug, even though I felt very uncomfortable. But as on the way home, I actually called my dad and told him everything. And even though he was like, "Oh, you being crazy, Serena," but he was so silent after I told him I have every confession. I told him, meet me at the police station and I will tell them everything. And with the news evidence, the police have now everything they needed. When they arrested Justin, he was terrified and asked how they even find out about this. And they said, anonymous tip, actually. But then he realized it was me. And he felt betrayed. And to make it a bit shorter, that he went to trial and I witnessed and testified, and even Sabrina, Max, and even Jack testified against him. And even though but even when brought up, even when my lawyer turned to prove him, to make more evidence that that Justin was unstable person who had this uncontrolled anger issues, because we had informed my lawyer about his past in college, how he acted out, even though that was not tied to this case, but we wanted to inform him about his about Justin's past, so at least that they can build another better case that he could be end up in jail or something. And even though they were not doing that, but I did also in court did mention about some of Justin's past behavior in the past. And eventually the jury convicted him guilty. And he was actually surprising enough sentenced to lifetime in jail without parole. He was devastated. He was done for it. But I was laughing afterwards and crying of joy that he was now finally behind bars. And me, I was just happy I can move on and that I didn't have to be worried about him being around the next corner every single time. And only a few months later, me and Jack actually got married. And it was actually a very beautiful wedding ceremony. But even a few months after me and Jack came back home from our honeymoon, I literally got a letter from the jail from Justin. He had begged me to apply to back to telling my lawyer that everything I told him back for what about his past and all what's happening wasn't real. All that was just nothing didn't actually happen. But what he didn't know, and all that one he said, including the recording, he never meant everything. He would withdraw all his confession. And it was too late though, because I didn't actually answer that. But he kept sending me letters after letters. And I actually told my lawyer about this, and I did send only one letter, which said something like in the words of, since this had been a while since I don't remember exactly words, but I said something like, Justin, this is my only and final letter to you. Whenever you do, don't try to reach out to me, and I will never withdraw my statement. And that is my final words, because what you did is something you need to realize you are a horrible person. What you put me through back in college, and now even now back later on, it terrified me. You put me through a living nightmare. But now, behind bars is the best thing that I could ever ask for. I'm now married with my beloved husband Jack, and I'm never leaving him because of you. Even if I did, I would never even take you back. And in fact, I hope you will spend the rest of your life there and never ever want to ever see you or hear from you ever again. Serena. That was the last letter or the only one I did send to him. But I did really find out that he did try to reach out to me again and again, at least twice. But Jack found the letters and burned them, or at least threw them away. And he did tell me that. And he told me what they were about. And, well, there was just merely that he just confessed to me that he loved me and that he was going to try to get his case being reopened so that he could be released from jail. But I would always be in there on those occasions of telling this court that if they try to release him, they've released a monster on the streets. And having this mental unstable monster were harming me, my family, and friends, especially my husband Jack. He nearly killed him, and I would never want to see that freaking monster on the street ever again. And that is my only word about Justin. So that is one of my story about Justin. But it at least had a more happier ending though. One of the things that made this a happy ending was Jack. Having this amazing great man in my life, he made me feel safe, protected, and having this unlimited of freedom. And not only that, just 2 years after we got married, we had our first daughter, which we named Sabrina, and even made Sabrina her my daughters as her godmother. And for that, and Jack, Justin, I would never want to see you ever again. And that is my statement. The end.